let's start things very basic. What's base case and what's worst case for the economy as it pertains to Evergrande?
So I think the base case would be Beijing stepping in to conduct a managed restructuring and for the firm itself, and also to basically restructure the debt. But the thing is, I don't think they want to. Beijing wants to be seen as bailing out Evergrande and also its investors and creditors. So they will have to come up with some sort of restructuring plan. I think that's the basic assumption that we will rely on. And then if that's the case, then we will still expect some spillover to, say, the real estate sector, because generally speaking, the financing conditions of the developers would continue to be under stress for a while until we get more clarity over the Evergrande saga. That's one thing. The second thing is I would expect more PBOC actions. So we have seen liquidity injections. I would perhaps expect more if that's necessary. I would expect the PBOC to advance a RRR cut, which I have been expecting to come in at some point this year. Now, I think the fallout would be contained in terms of its economic impact and policy impact in the base case scenario. So perhaps I think Beijing will have to speed up infrastructure spending to shore up some of the growth slowdown that would potentially be generated by the Evergrande saga, given that the property sector or housing sales, etc., have already been slowing anyway. So that's basically the base case. We can talk about the downside scenario as well, if there is if the plan doesn't work out
Tommy,
as it is.
Yeah, Tommy, I was going to ask you about that then. So theoretically, the downside scenario comes in what form? Does that come in the form of broadly lower housing prices because Evergrande's starting to discount some of their properties? Does it come in the form of like, what are the transmission effects? Higher yields, for example, refinancing costs for other property developers? Like, what are, say, the top 2 or 3 things you're watching?
I would say the refinancing cost would be higher. Well, obviously on the bond market side of things, but also on bank credit to these developers, because we know that the banks have been trying to cut exposure to the sector in general, relatively speaking, and if the stress or the Evergrande saga is being more contagious than we would expect in the base case, then obviously that would transmit into higher financing costs, even less credit going to the developers, and perhaps some more fire sale of properties of Evergrande that would bring down the housing prices, and that would create even more stress on the real estate sector in general, and that would actually transmit into slower economic growth. Now, I think at that case, I would expect the Beijing government to step in even more if the stress of the real estate sector is so big that I would expect, even though in the base case, Beijing it's unlikely to relax, the 3 red lines or any property cooling measure. But in a scenario where the contagion risk is much larger, then I think Beijing will start considering that.
I think the billion-dollar question, well, at least in the context of Evergrande, let's put it this way, the $300 billion question, because that's liabilities for them. Very, very simple. Do you think Beijing's got this one handled? No problem. What's the big bazooka that they have that can handle all of this, just in case it gets to that point?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because the thing is, Beijing doesn't want to be seen as bailing out investors or creditors, and they want to reduce moral hazard. I mean, that's basically a goal that they want to do. But then it's kind of difficult to achieve if they actually want to save Evergrande in such a way. So I would expect that it's hard to see what kind of a big rescue plan that they would come up with, and they will engineer a plan in which at least I would say that the impact to home buyers or the small retail investors or the small suppliers would have would have a relatively limited impact, whereas the banks or the
Right.
bigger investors, bondholders, could take a bit of hit, or more than a bit actually.
In fact, I'm glad you brought that up because we did a sort of deep dive into the balance sheet of Evergrande. I'm sure our viewers saw that there, that most of the short-term liabilities anyway are more payables than debt. Now, let's put everything together. You talked about a slowdown. Your forecast, sir, for the Chinese economy the second half?
So I'm forecasting a 5% year-on-year growth for the second half. So we will see we've already seen a very weak August because of the COVID outbreak. There will be some sort of a rebound in the fourth quarter. It's kind of statistical that would happen, and also because if there's no more severe COVID outbreaks, then a recovery should happen. Next year, we're expecting a 5.8%, but the downside risk is probably bigger because we have yet to see that the domestic economy, in particular the household consumption sector, it continues to be relatively weak. So without a more stronger recovery of the household sector, it's hard to see how China's economy could rebound in a more sustainable way. So I think that's one of the risks that I'm watching. And now with the housing sector, could perhaps be in a more trouble position. I think that doesn't bode well for the outlook and adds more downside risk to it.